Cool. So I think what we're gonna do for this live stream, it'll probably be it probably won't be a couple hours like the last one was. I'm just gonna run this. I want to run through some PowerShell stuff. Kind of want to do a PowerShell crash course because I think it's a very underutilized tool that you guys have access to. So on the platform, we have Module 8, which is Introduction to Windows PowerShell 5.1. And the difference between PowerShell 5 and 6 and 7, that if you know how to use PowerShell 5, you'll be able to get along in the other versions. There's just newer modules and things like that, but the syntax doesn't change that much. But we have all these lectures here that are available to you guys. I don't know how many of you guys have actually popped into this module yet or gotten through it, but I want to get you guys acclimated with PowerShell. So what I'm going to do is at Server Academy under the labs, I'm going to be using the Windows Server 2016 Active Directory lab. So if you guys want to follow along, you can do that and launch the lab. Also, you could just run PowerShell on your local computer. If you click the start here, you can type in PowerShell ISE, and it should be installed. If not, then you can download it. So JG says sounds good. Cool. All right, so everyone says it sounds good. That's awesome. And then at the end, if you guys want to ask some questions, we can hang out and do some of that. But okay, cool. So everyone can hear. All right. So I guess I'll give you guys a couple. I'll give like 2 minutes or something if you guys want to launch the lab, because that'll take a second for it to come up. While that's doing that, I can just talk about what PowerShell is. So PowerShell is the scripting language that comes with Windows Server. Some operating systems rely on PowerShell for like administration, like Server Core. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Start, and I'm going to type in PowerShell ISE, just like you would on your home computer. It's the same for Windows Server. And I'm just going to right-click on the ISE, and I'm going to say Run as Administrator. Okay, so Herms is asking how you enable, I think he's trying to say sound. I think it's a typo. You said you can hear me. If you're trying to enable your mic, I have to switch this over from a live stream to a meeting, and I might do that at the end. But I'm going to leave it as it is right now. So just for this part of it. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you guys is how to read input from the user, because a lot of times when you're writing scripts, you might want to take user input, and we're going to go through like a series of 5 or 6 different scenarios, and hopefully this will be helpful to you guys. So first thing you want to do whenever you're writing any kind of script, I'm just going to close this because I won't be using that tab, is you hold shift and hit the number 3, and what that does is it puts the pound sign, and this allows you to write a comment. So commenting your code is super important because it allows you to understand what you were thinking when you write those lines of code. So if we want to gather user input, we'd make a comment and just say gather user input, and we want to store it in a variable. So we'll say and store it in a variable. Okay. So from here, we need to make a variable. The way you do that is by hitting Shift and 4, the $sign, and we can just name it anything that we want, as long as we don't include special characters, and we don't have a space in the name. So we can call it input, we can call it user input. The capitalization can be any way that you want. Variables, it's just a reference for you to store data inside of it. So we're just going to call it input, and we're going to say input is equal to read-host, and this is a command to tell PowerShell that I want the user to type in some information and I want to store it inside of a variable. In this case, the variable is going to be input. So read-host has a set of parameters that we can type. And the way that I can find that at the bottom, I can say get-command, and I can say read-host. Okay, this outputs a command. Normally when you're running get-command, you'd be searching for a command. So we'd actually want to use get-help. We'll say read-host, and I'm not sure if the help has been updated. So I'll say the update help. Okay, yeah, so we probably want to run this, and that's going to take a couple of minutes before it completes. So while this is running and it's updating the help, I'm going to go back up here, and for read-host, we're going to do -prompt. And that's going to allow us to have the computer give us a message like, we want to get some type of user input. So let's say, please enter your name. So when we execute this script, we're going to get a prompt down here in the command line that's going to say, please enter your name. And then below that, we can then output that information or do something with that information. We can manipulate the system. We can create user. You can even create user accounts. You can have someone type in a first name and last name, and then it'll create an Active Directory account. You can create folders, different things like that. So what I'm going to do is say write-host, and we're just going to output some information on the screen, kind of like a hello world. So we'll just say hello, and then we're going to say $input, and we'll put a closing quotation mark. So kind of what's going on here is we're creating a variable called input, and the value of that is going to be set to read-host, and then whatever the user types in, and we're giving them a prompt to type in their first name. Now we don't have any kind of guarantee that they're going to type in their first name. They could type in anything, but this script is going to say, once it takes that information, it's going to say that hello, and then whatever first name that we typed in. Hang on a second, I gotta turn my sound off. Getting notifications. Drag this over here. Okay, cool. Cool. So I don't know how long this update help is going to take, but I'm just going to wait for that to finish. If anyone has any questions while I'm going over this stuff, go ahead and just post it in the comments. I want you guys to ask questions. So there's no stupid questions and ask away, especially like right now when I have to wait anyways. It's a good time for you guys to ask questions. Okay, so the updated help is done. Excuse me. So if I go ahead and I press F5, it's going to execute the script. Here at the bottom of the console, let me see if I can zoom this in for you guys so you can see it a little bit better. So here at the bottom of the console, it's asking me to enter my name. So I can type in Paul, and then it's just going to say, hello, Paul. Now we can expand this and say, it's very nice to meet you. And we can say input again and just call it there. So if I execute this, it's going to say, hey, what's your name? And I can say Joe, and it's going to say, hello, Joe. It's very nice to meet you, Joe. Okay. So that's a basic example of how you can grab user input. So let's see, let's go on to the next one. The next example that I want to talk about, and we're just going to comment out these lines. That's another very common thing that you'll be doing when you're running PowerShell scripts is when you're testing, you might write a test line, and then once you're done with it, you don't necessarily want to delete it because we're going to come back to this later. So we'll just comment it out, and we'll do that by just adding the # before and adding a space. Of course, space is not required, but it's just a nice way to format it. So the next thing that you're going to run into when you're doing PowerShell scripts is going to be if statements. You're going to have to do logic. So you'll be presented two choices, and you'll have to decide, or maybe more than that, but you'll have to decide, if my variable is equal to X, then do, A, B, and C. And if my variable is equal to Y, then we're going to do D, E, and F. So if statements is simply written by just saying if, and then inside of these parentheses, we're going to write the condition that we're going to evaluate. So in this case, we can say if input is -equal or -eq to Paul, we can do an opening brace and go down a couple lines, and we'll do a closing brace. And we're going to go ahead and use this now. Let's go ahead and uncomment that line right there. So we're going to keep the input line where we're saying, hey, please enter your name. So if input is equal to name, let's say write-host. Hello, Paul. I remember you. Can be whatever you want. I'm just coming up with arbitrary stuff. Else, if it's not equal to Paul, then we're going to say write-host. And we'll say, sorry, input. I do not know who you are. And we'll end the quotation mark. All right, so we're going to get the user input, whatever I type in. And if I type in Paul, then it's going to evaluate it on this line. And based on that information, it's going to take this, this action right here. If it's not Paul, then it's going to go down here, and it's going to run this line of code. So let's go ahead and highlight that. And you can either press F5. You can also highlight things in the ISE and press F8 to just run the selection. So I'll go ahead and just press F8. And it's going to say, please enter your name. And I'll type in Paul. And it says, hello, Paul, I remember you. Now, if I press F5 and I type in Joe, it says, sorry, Joe, I do not know who you are. And we can see that down here. So if I type in Mary, it's just going to do the same thing. Sorry, Mary, I don't know who you are. If I type in Lisa, same deal. Sorry, Lisa, I don't know who you are. Now, there might be scenarios where you're going to have more than one condition that you want to check. And you can do that by doing things like an else if, like this, else if, and then you can do in parentheses, if input is dash equal to, let's say, Mary. What we would do is just copy something along these lines. We'll say, hello, Mary. We'll say, hello, Mary, I know who you, or I remember you. And we can just add a smiley face to make it different than the first one. And then we can add an else and the same line, sorry, input, I don't know who you are. All right, so let me explain what we're doing here. So same thing, we're taking the input and we're evaluating if it's equal to Paul. If it is, then we'll say, hello, Paul, I remember you. If it's equal to Mary, then we'll say, hello, Mary, I remember you. And then if it's not equal to any of those, it'll say, sorry, I don't know who you are. So if we run this, we can type in Mary, and it'll say, hello, Mary, I know who you are. And if we do something simple like spell Mary differently or Marie, then it's going to say, sorry, I don't know who you are. Now, this is kind of an inefficient way of doing this. There are, if else, there's more than one way to skin the cat. We'll put it that way. And another way that you might want to do this is using a switch statement. So to get rid of those lines of code, we could write a switch statement by just saying switch, and we'll say input, and we'll do an opening brace, go down, do a couple of closing braces. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to write the value that we want to evaluate, so like Paul, and then based on that condition, what lines of code we want to execute for this condition. So to rewrite what we just had, we could write Mary, and we can have default. Okay? So if we type in Paul, it's going to execute any code that's inside of this block. If we type in Mary, it's going to execute any code, keep getting tongue-tied on that, any code that's inside of this block. And if it's anything else, it's going to go down to the default and execute the code inside of here. So what we can do is just go ahead and say write-host. And we can just say, I remember Paul. Okay. And then we can copy that and just paste that into the Mary line and just say, I remember Mary. And under default, we could just paste that and just say, I don't remember you. Oops. Try to spell it at least somewhat right. Okay, so now if we execute this, I type in Paul, it's going to say, I remember Paul. I remember Mary. And if we do something different like Joey, it's going to say, I don't remember you at all. Okay, so there's multiple ways to skin a cat, or to skin this cat in particular. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't skin a cat. Maybe I should skin something else, skin a deer. I don't know. But there's more than one way around getting almost everything done when it comes to programming. There's a million different ways. And your job when you're writing code is to try and find the most efficient route, or the most efficient way to do something. A lot of the coding that I'm doing nowadays is working with the AWS Cloud API. So what we focus on is trying to limit our API calls to Amazon. And it just literally, it's a ton of if statements, it's a ton of switch statements, and a lot of loops. So we're going to get into loops soon. But Herms is asking, can you explain the write-host? So I don't, and if there's a PDF. I do not have a PDF, but I can make you guys one. I am going to hand out a PowerShell script file at the end of this. It's going to contain all of these examples, Herms. So you'll be able to review that, and everyone here will be able to review that. But write-host, we can type this down here in the console. Write-host essentially means write to the console and nothing else. So this is something that I am going to write to the console. If I press enter, it just outputs it in this, but right below the command where I execute it. So it's different, however, than echo. If I say echo, and it's not exactly apparent why it's different, but if I say echo, this is something that I want to write, it gives you the same result. However, when you guys start getting into logging, write-host and echo are two completely different things when it comes to PowerShell. So if I want to save something to a file, let's say I want to save this switch to a file. We'll call it, let me first CD into the C drive. And I'll just make a directory by make dir, and I'll say test. make dir. That stands for make directory. So I'm making a directory on the C drive called test. All right, so here's the directory. Now if I type in dir, I can see all the directories, and here's the new folder that I just created called test. So I'm going to cd into test. Okay, and let's say, sorry, LLL is a Linux command. I didn't mean to type that. Let's say we want to output this to test.txt. Let's go ahead and just hit F8. Oh, it might not actually let me do this. I might have to do out-file, and this might completely change my example that I was going to do. But let's see. Okay, so we're going to do, I don't know if this is going to work. Actually, this example might not work. But it's, yeah, let's not do that. I'm going to have to look into that one. But essentially, write host, if you're getting into logging, like if we wanted to log input, and I put that to, what would it be? Test.txt or something. Oh, it's still not, that still might not work actually. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, let me go to the C drive and test, and we have test. Okay, perfect. Wrap this inside of quotes. Let me just double check one thing really quick. Okay, so I want to see if I can take the output of this and save it to a file. This is going to take some experimentation. So we're going to do outfile dash file path would be test.txt, and I might have to do this inside of, yeah, I'm probably going to have to do it like this. Okay, so let me go ahead and run this. Okay. Okay. All right, so it's taking, essentially what is going on, if I change this to echo, it should, I'm just going to do it first and double check before I tell you this. It should save this to the file. So let me go ahead and hit up here, F8. Let's say Paul. Do test. Okay. Here's the difference between write host and echo. Write host is specifically set up to log things to your console. That's things that you don't want. There's different, there's something in PowerShell called redirection, output redirection, and there's like an error log redirection. There's like system out, there's like 6 codes. And write host is only for this console right here. So essentially, this is for write host is for the administrator who's running the script to look at it on this blue console here at the bottom. Now, if you're getting into logging information, say we decide that we want to actually log whatever the user input. So say we change this to something like, actually we could just leave it like it is. So say we want to take the input that they have and we want to save it inside of the file called test.txt, right? If we run this, hit F5, and say enter Mary, and I go and I look at this file, we're going to find that it says I remember Mary. That's because we're taking the output of this command and we're piping it to outfile and we're saving it to test.txt. So when you're getting into logging, if I didn't want something to be logged, instead of writing echo, I would write write-host. Okay, so now when I execute the script, I could say Mary again. I'm going to say I remember Mary, and now there's nothing outputted to the screen. So you might wonder why that's important. Well, there might be functions like, for example, here we go. Function, and we'll call this get name. Let me go up here. I'm going to make a function, get dash name, or we'll just call it get name. Okay. And I will go down and I'll close the function. All right, now let me execute this and I'll store the function into memory. So I've created a function called get name. So now inside of this console, if I run the command get name, it's going to ask me, please enter your name, and I'm going to say Paul. It's just going to do the regular output. But say I want to store what the user inputs. So what I could do is I could say name is equal to get name. And if I run this, what's going to happen is it's going to essentially do nothing. I'm going to say my name is Paul, and it's going to execute, it's going to complete the script. However, when I try to access my variable that I just created called name, it's going to come back as blank. And that's because we used write host. If I change this to echo, or if I go down here, I can add a line write dash host, and I can just output the whatever they typed in for the name. And if I run this, and I say name is equal to get name, and I type in Paul, and then I try to access that variable called name, it's going to come back as blank. If I change this to echo, however, and I re-execute the script, and I say name is equal to get name, remember the difference is now we're echoing the input, okay? And I press enter, and I say Paul. Now if I access the variable name, it's going to come back as Paul. So when you're doing something like write host, it's only for logging purposes in the console. If you want to actually output a value that you can grab, then you're going to want to use echo. Hopefully that answers your question. If it doesn't, let me know in the chat. But I love getting questions like that. That one, it's been a while since I've written something like that actually had to like do logging. But when you get into writing, like if you're working with any kind of API and you want to log things or they're running as a schedule and you're not going to always be present, it's important to understand the difference between write host and echo, because sometimes you're not going to be there to watch the console and watch the commands go through. So you'll have to log it to a file, which means you're going to not want to use write host. You're going to want to use echo. That's kind of advanced. It's definitely more advanced than I thought we would get into today. But if that kind of blows your mind or it's confusing to you, then don't worry about it. That's way more advanced than we're going to get for the rest of this, that's for sure. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete this function. Yeah, I wasn't even planning about talking about functions, but I kind of just like blew through it. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about that I use almost all, like I don't know the last time I wrote a script and didn't use one of these, is a loop. So there's all kinds of different loops that you can use. We're going to talk about a for loop. And what we're essentially going to do is we're going to take a number 1 and we're going to increment that all the way up to 10. And we're going to write a loop that will complete a certain number of actions, and it'll increment the loop to 2, and then it'll do another set of actions and so forth. So we're going to do that by saying for, and then we're going to say I is equal to 1. And we're just making a variable. I is the general one that's used. It just stands for integer. I believe it does anyways. So we're just, you could call this whatever you wanted though. You could call it counter. You could call it number, anything you want. We're just going to name it I. And we'll do a semicolon. And then we're going to say, while I is dash LT or less than, dash LT stands for less than 10. We're going to do another semicolon. And then we're going to take the action that we want to do. And that's going to be I plus plus. And then we'll do a closing brace. We'll do an opening brace. An opening and a closing brace, sorry. So that was a closing parentheses, and then we did an opening brace and a closing brace, just like you did for your functions, for the switch statements, for the if statements. It's all the same. What we can do now is just output the value of I, and we can do that by just putting in the variable name here. So if we execute this and press F5, it's going to output all of these numbers down here at the bottom. And we can change this to be less than or equal to 10. I think it's LE is less than or equal to, and if we hit F5, then it'll count from 1 all the way up to 10. Another thing we could do is we could add a sleep, and then say dash milliseconds, and we could say 50, and that'll allow us to see the numbers being typed out. You could extend that sleep, and then it just kind of like when you don't run it with the sleep command, it looks like it's all happening at once, and it's not. But if you add the sleep, you can kind of see it, that it's counting all the way up to 10, and then it's stopping. So one thing that you can do that's pretty useful is you can make like in PowerShell progress bar. So if you're running some kind of complicated script and you want to know, what percentage of the way you are through the script. I'm actually doing that right now for one of my API calls that I wish I could show you, but I can't show you because it has sensitive information in it, or at least private information that I wouldn't want being exposed on a webinar. But progress bars are super helpful because it can let you know how far along you are in the script. Because there's nothing worse than just having a script that's running and having no idea where you are in the script. So one way that we can do that is with a write dash progress command. And before we get to that, let's change this to while I is less than or equal to 100. And if we press F5, now it's going to count all the way up to 100. We could probably even get rid of this sleep timer and just run it. It's still too fast. So we'll add 10 milliseconds and press F5. And here we can see it's counting all the way up to 100 now. So what we can do, instead of just outputting the value of I, we can do write dash progress. And we're going to say activity, and we'll just call this counting to 100. And the status will be I. Oops, inside of quotation marks, we're going to do the variable I. And we'll say complete. And percent complete. And I'm using tab, by the way, to finish those commands that I'm typing in. Percent complete is going to be equal to I. All right, so now if we hit F5 and we run this, we can now see that we have a counter. And I'm going to add more time on it so it's not so fast. Let's go to 50. Oops, 59 is fine. Oh, man, it's so fast. Let's try 250. So here we have a timer that's showing how quickly we are going through the script. Now, you would never write a script and just tell it to sleep, because that's it's just silly. You're not doing anything. But when you get into scripting and you're doing things that actually take time, and it might take more than 30 seconds or 5 seconds to run, having a percentage complete is really nice at the top of your script. So you could do something else like add percentage. I'm not sure if that's going to work or not. Let me check. Oh, yeah. So there we go. Now we have 5% complete. You can do other things, like you could say under status, you could do in parentheses I out of 100. And what that's going to do is tell us what number we're at out of 100. So if I hit F5, you can see that you're on number 10 out of 100. And it's exactly the same as a percentage because we're counting to 100. Just the way that it works out, they're exactly the same. But these can be very useful, or a useful tool that you can use to make your scripting easier. Okay, so the last example that I want to talk about, and we're almost about to hit 30 minutes, so this is probably, we're getting close to when I want to cut it off. But the last thing I want to talk about is just an example of creating a number of folders on your computer. So this is what makes PowerShell great. If you have a series of repetitive tasks that you need to complete, PowerShell can be the tool that kind of saves you. It can do it for you. So let's say, for example, I'm going to remake that folder I just deleted called test. And okay, I think I'm still in that folder actually. So if I hit BR, yeah, I'm there. All right, let's say that we had to create 10 folders or 20 folders, and they all had to have the same prefix. Well, I could go in here and manually create it and give it my prefix name and say _1, and then I can make a new one, call it prefix _2, or say I could just copy and paste it and then rename it to be number 3, or I could just copy and paste and paste and paste, and I could do it that way too. But I think the better way to do it is to use PowerShell. And one way we could do that is by kind of combining all the skills that we've learned so far. So we're going to get user input, and then we're going to run a for loop. All right. So let's ask the user what the prefix should be. So we'll say prefix is equal to read-host, and we're going to say prompt is equal to what would you like your folder prefix to be? And that's not good English, but that's okay. And then the next thing we want to know is how many folders does the user want to create? So we can say count. Count is equal to, so I need to make that all uppercase. Oh, I hit caps lock apparently. Count is equal to, and this is going to be another read-host, and the prompt will be, how many folders would you like to create? And I'm going to stop correcting my typos because my keyboard is too far from my computer, my wireless keyboard, so it doesn't take all my keystrokes. All right, how many folders, at least that's going to be the excuse I'm going with right now. How many folders would you like to create? All right, and make sure you spell it wrong. Okay. So if we execute this, just highlight it and press F8 to only execute these 2 lines. It says, what would you like your folder prefix to be? And we could just call it Paul's folders. And let's say we want to make 25. So now if I want to access the variable prefix, I can just type that down here. And that's going to be the prefix. And then I have count, which is going to be equal to 25. So I have these 2 numbers stored in these variables, and I can now access them. So we're going to change this for loop. We're going to say while it's less than or equal to the count, and we're going to increment it by 1. So we're going to count from 1 to 25, okay? And this is going to change because we're not going to a number of 100, but we can figure that out in a second. What we want to do here is say make directory, and we're going to say dash path, and the path is going to be equal to, we're going to write 2 sub expression operators. And a sub expression operator is a $ in open and closed parentheses. So essentially, if I write get dash date, and then I write it inside of quotes, or say I want to say today is, so I go write dash host, today is get dash date, and I execute that, it's just going to actually output what I typed in. However, if inside those quotes I wrap this inside of a sub expression operator and I press enter, it's going to say today is 7:10. It's going to actually execute the command. So it just evaluates the commands inside of the sub expression operator. So that's what we're going to do here. We're wrapping things in quotes, but really we're just executing the commands that we want to type here. So while we're going to make the directory, and the path is going to be prefix, and in between that and the count, we're going to do an underscore, and then we can do I. And if you wanted, we could actually not even do the underscore. We could just leave that, but so we're going to make a folder that's equal to prefix and then I. So it'll look something like this. So if we take prefix and we take whatever number we're at, let's see if I can do this, 25. If I wrap this inside of quotes, it's going to say Paul's folder 25. However, we don't want a space. So if we do an underscore, it's going to mess it up and it's going to give us a problem. So we need to use, you guessed it, a sub expression operator. So if we do this, prefix 25, now it combines them and it gives us Paul's folder 25. So if we wanted to add an underscore, we would just rerun this and we'll just call it my prefix, whatever you want to call it, and I'll add an underscore. And let's say we want to have 50 of them. Okay, so now we got these 2 things, so we can put them together. So we can say, if we copy this right here, and we execute that just to see what it's going to look like, it's going to add the code. So it'll be my prefix 1, and then it's going to count all the way up to 50. Okay. So let's go ahead, and I think we're ready to make this. So let's go ahead and press F5 and see what happens. So we're going to say, it's going to say, what do you want the prefix to be? And I'll call it my prefix. I'm just going to add an underscore, and I'll press enter, and it's going to say, how many do you want? And I'm going to pull up Windows Explorer. And I'm going to hit Windows right key. Oh, that doesn't work. Bummer. Okay, well, it kind of worked. Let me do that again. Here we go. Okay, so now when I execute this, we're going to see that they're all going to be created over here on the right side. All right, so there's 50 folders that it created for us. And we could do a lot more than 50 if we wanted to. But that's one way that you can use PowerShell to speed up whatever you're working on. Here's another one. And let's say we want to have 250 folders. Press enter. And oh man, okay, we ran into some errors. Let's see what happened. Oh, okay, so that's funny. Because we got up to 222, that progress was higher than 100. So it gave us an error. You can't have a percentage complete higher than 100, right? So what you'd want to do is take the count, and you'd want to divide that by the current number that you're on, I think, and that would give you the percentage. So yeah, so that is going to be not what we want. We'd have to fix that. But so if we go here and we check on this, it did create, I canceled it, so it only got to 223. We can run this again. Go ahead and press F5. Call it test, or let's call it Paul Hill underscore, and we'll say 500. Why not? Go for broke. Press enter, and there we go. We just made 500 folders, and so it goes from folder 1 all the way up to 500. So this could be really, really useful. It can save you a lot of time. Let's say you have a sheet of new users that you need to make. You need to make a folder for each new user, and you have 10,000 users. Well, it's going to be a lot easier to do it with PowerShell than it would be to sit there and type each one out. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you guys about is how to import CSV files or read spreadsheets. So in this lab, if you guys have it open, there's a folder on the desktop called New Users, and I'm just going to rename this, and I'm going to get rid of this number at the end, and we'll just call it New Users. And if I go to view and hit file name extensions, we can see it's new users.csv. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this inside of my test folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a variable at the top here. And we're going to say CSV is equal to import-CSV. And the path is going to be in quotation mark C /test / and that's lowercase test. And we're going to do new, it's going to be new users.csv. Okay. Now I'm going to execute this and make sure that it works without an error. So now we have all the data that's inside of this new users.csv. And I don't have like Excel installed, so it just has to open it in Notepad. But we have all of these files here. So now if I come down here and I try to access my CSV folder or my CSV files, I get all the information. I can do things like pipe it to format-table, get a better look at it. I can also pipe it to something called outgrid view or OGV. And that's going to open this little utility, and I can kind of filter for the data. So if I want to find, this Clifton or what? Yeah, last name Clifton. This is all just example data. But if I want to look at Stan, I can search for people's names. This can save you some time. So this is one way that you can look at your data and just kind of evaluate it before you run any kind of actions on it. And it's easier to look at than here. Or trying to look at it just in the console. So always remember piping things to OGV because that can save you a lot of time. So now that we have this, let's say that we want to iterate over all of these and we want to make a folder. So I'll just rerun this again. So let's say I want to make a folder with the last name of every user, and I want to maybe I want to make each user 5 folders. So how would we do that? Well, we have the data here. So we're going to use what's called a for each loop. So I'm going to go down. And I'm going to comment out these lines because we're going to be modifying it heavily. So we won't be doing this. We won't be doing this. Okay. So we're going to say for each, and we'll say line in CSV. Okay. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking each line of this CSV file, and let's bring this back up. So for each one of these lines of the CSV file, we can go over and we can access each of these. We can access the address for this particular line, the email address. We can access the first name, whatever the case may be. But we're going to write a block of code, and it's going to iterate over all of the different lines, and it's going to count down. So what we're going to do basically is go over each line and create a folder or a set of folders with their first name, as a prefix. So, oops, I want to keep that open. So for each line in CSV, if we just start by saying write-host and we just say line and we execute this, it's just going to output all the information. Okay. However, what we could do is grab something like first name. So now it just outputs the first name of every user. And we could do something like we could wrap this in quotation marks and inside a sub-expression operator. And we could do first name, and we could say line inside of another sub-expression operator. Let me close that quotation mark. We say line.email address. I'm going to wrap this inside a sub-expression operator. And I'm going to move this quotation mark to the end of the line. Now, if we output this, it's going to output their first name, and it's going to output their email address. So if I press F5, it gives me Mike and then his email address. Okay, same thing for all these other users. All right. So if I want to, let's say I want to get their last name. Oops. Press F5. Now I've switched everything to the last name. All right. Now let's say that we want to create a series of folders for these users. So what I could do, I'm going to delete the email there. I'm going to say creating folders for, and then whatever their last name is. And I could change this to include the first name as well. So let's do that. Let's go back here. And I'll just change this to first name. And what I'm using to get this information is these columns or each of these rows. Let me do this in OGB, it'll be easier to see. We have columns first name and last name. So when I'm typing in dot first name, I'm referencing this column name here. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So if I press F5 now, it says creating folders for Mike Terry, Ridley Quinn, Ripley Dalton. I don't know why those names are so similar. I created this demo kind of information, and I apparently came up with 2 very similar names. So let's say we want to create 5 folders and we want it to be in a prefix of last name and then the number of the folder that we're on. So what we do, if we go down here and we take a look at our for loop, we're going to say for, we'll just make a comment and say create folders for user. And we're going to say for I is equal to 1. And then we're going to say while I is dash less than or equal to 5. Oops, do a colon there, semicolon. We're going to say I plus plus. Okay, now inside of this, we're going to say make directory. And we're going to say dash path. In the path, we're going to have to do some sub expression operators, right? So the prefix would be line dot last name. And I could add an underscore, and then I could add I. All right. So essentially, I need to run this and make sure it works. But what we should be doing is grabbing all the information out of the CSV folder, and then we're going to iterate over all those different lines. If I can run this, there we go. We're going to iterate over all of these lines. So we're going to start with Mike, and then we're going to go to Ridley. So we should have a folder for the first run of Terry, and then it's going to be Terry 1, Terry 2, Terry 3, Terry 4, Terry 5. All right. And so let's go ahead and hit F5 and see what happens. Okay, so it looks like it worked. It created 5 folders for Braden, for Basil, and basically all the users in our spreadsheet. So, you know, you can, obviously, if we had to do, even if we just had to do 5 for each of these users, or if we just, I mean, this list is only like, I think it's like 20 users or something like that. Let me see. It's probably not even 20. It looks like 10 users. But this is a lot of work if you were to do this manually, and you're prone to error. You could type in their names wrong. But using PowerShell, you're pretty safe. You're not going to have to worry about typos or anything like that unless you mess up your code somehow. Okay. So I think that's going to wrap up. Oh, I almost hit 45 minutes. So there was one other thing that I wanted to talk about that I just thought about while I was writing that code, but now I can't remember what it was. But are there any questions for me right now? I definitely have to wrap this up in like 15 minutes. But if there's any questions, I definitely want to hear from you guys. I also want to hear if you guys like this style of training. We've thought about doing kind of pre-roll videos where we just play one of the lectures that we've been working on, and then you guys watch that, and then we open it up for a Q&A at the end. One of the things that I actually helped someone with was installing Windows updates. He had like a bunch of updates that he had to install, and he had to actually go through and manually click them, and it was like, oh man, my thing isn't. Wow, it's shutting down. Well, it's a good thing I was done with that. Now let me turn that off. We don't need a screen share anymore. Yeah, so Herms asked if we record. I am recording this session, so I plan on emailing it out at the end. But one of my friends was at work, and he had to install several manual updates. And what had to happen was he basically had to go through and manually click on each update, and it was like 5 minutes, and it was like, I think it was over 100 updates. But we were able to write a PowerShell script that would just find all the updates and just execute all of them. So he didn't have to do anything. Saved him a lot of time. I think we made a tutorial about it, but definitely start using PowerShell. If you work at Windows at all, even if you're just on your home computer, it can be super useful. If you have to sort pictures, say you have a bunch of photos all in one folder and you want to sort them by month or something like that, you can write a PowerShell script that will do that for you. Anything that's redundant that you have to do over and over and over again, you can probably script it with PowerShell. So I strongly recommend, let me share my screen again. I strongly recommend that you guys get into the module 8 that we have. Let me pull this up so you guys can see what's going on. Here we go. I strongly recommend that you guys go over here to module 8 under courses. So once you log in, just go to the courses tab and make your way down to module 8 because it's a lot of information and it's all about PowerShell. We even get to desired state configuration, which is a whole nother level of automation. So definitely make your way down. I know it's at the bottom. It's like one of the last courses that most people hit, but you can start using the stuff that you learn in module 8, pretty much right away. So that's pretty much all I got for you guys. I'll probably run another live hangout next week. I'm thinking about doing them every other week instead of weekly, but I'll let you guys know for sure. But I'm just gonna watch the comments and see what you guys have to say before before we head out. Oh yeah, I got new coasters, which I think are kind of cool. New drink coasters. I thought they were kind of cool. I should mail some of these to you guys. I got like more than I need. But yeah, it came with like this little thing, like this holder. I thought it was kind of cool. I got a new desk and I didn't want to leave my drinks on them, so I was like, I need to get some coasters. Cool. So looks like that's pretty much it for the questions. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and wrap this up. We went just about 45 minutes, it looks like. Yeah, just about 45 minutes. So thanks for hanging out, guys, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Oh, Herms is asking me if I can hang out. Yeah, I can hang out. Let me switch it to I'm going to end the recording, but yeah, I'll switch it to a chat so we can talk. All right. So to everyone else who's heading off, see you guys later.